Shalom and welcome to the weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. We're working today on Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 22. Starting back in verse 20, the Lord has begun appealing to his people to, well, what I used to say to my kids, stop and think. Stop and think about what you're doing and whom you're dealing with here. And in verse 22, he's going to call them to stop and reflect again on the greatness of his power. It's a long verse. Let's go ahead and read it in Hebrew as we get started. Ha'oti lo tirau ne'um Adonai. Im mipenai lo tachilu. Asher samti hol gavul layam. Hok olam velo ya'avrein hu. Vayit ga'ashu velo yukalu. V'hamu galav velo ya'avrun hu. Wow, that is a long one. Well, let's see. We're going to start with this hey, which looks like a hey, an article, but it's not. It's actually a hey interrogative. So it's going to be normally this form here. It takes a slightly different form because we have obviously a guttural with the aleph right afterwards. And this is our direct object marker with our first common singular suffix. So this is the direct object. We don't know of what yet, but here it is. Me, as we see it. Or is it not? Is it me? And then our negation, and then tirau. So what do we have here? Tau at the beginning, we have an u at the end, so we know it's going to be an imperfect. It's going to be a 2MP. This one's a kal from our verb yara, meaning to fear. So this is not ra'a, to see, but yara, to fear. So literally we would have you will not fear, but it's a question. Will you not fear me? But this me is very definitely front-loaded, so it's calling attention to where they should be focusing their attention. Will you not fear me? A declaration, or says Yahweh, says the Lord, an oracle of the Lord. Or, actually, this is, remember, whenever we have a hey interrogative at the beginning, if there's a two-part question, the second part usually begins with im, which normally is translated if, but here it's basically the functional equivalent of another hey interrogative. Okay, so it's basically the same thing here. Or, from my face, mipanai, so this is our preposition min, connected to the word face, and then with the suffix, this is the first common singular suffix. And from my face, will you not tremble? So same thing that we have here, this time from the verb. Well, there's actually a little variation on this. BDB says it's from the verb hul, or Halot actually puts it from the verb hil, with a yod instead of a shurik in the middle here. But in neither case it means to writhe or to tremble. It shows up, we saw it a little bit earlier in chapter 4, verse 19, often used with the pains of childbirth. But here it has a more general sense of tremble. And from my face, will you not tremble? So the Lord's asking these two questions. Won't you fear me? Won't you tremble from before my face? Now, this asher, which is usually who as sort of a relative pronoun. Let's go ahead and do the next couple words, then we'll come back and try to figure out what to do with this. Who, and then here we have I put. This is from the verb seem or sum, usually from, and this is just a first common, this is a perfect, obviously, with a T, a formative. So it's a perfect first common singular. This is a kal, and it's from the verb seem or sum, which means to place or to put. So it's I put hol, and this is the word for sand, like the sand of the seashore, which is what we're going to find here. I put the sand. Now you notice that there's sort of a play on words between this verb over here, hul or hil, and hol over here. You got the same basic consonants. So there's a little play on words here, which you're going to see a little bit later in one of the translations. So, now, what do we do with this asher? Well, if we look at it again, or will you not tremble before my face? And we could probably translate this as sort of an emphatic relative pronoun. I who, the one who I have put, in other words, I who have put the sand, or who have placed the sand, a boundary. Gavul is a boundary. So we almost have like a double accusative here. I have made the sand a boundary for the sea. Here's your article here for the, and then yam for sea. And hok, this is an kamet satuf, remember, because we have a non-accented syllable here with the makef, with the little hyphen there, makef. So this is actually a kamet satuf. And it means, we usually see this as a statute, for instance, like a commandment. But here it's the idea of a limit, a prescribed limit or a boundary. So I've made the sand a boundary for the sea, a statute, a limit, a boundary forever, an eternal boundary. Literally, it's in construct state with the noun olam. So it's an eternal boundary. And not... Now, what do we have with this one? Oh, boy, this is a little bit complicated. We got a yod at the beginning. The hu at the end, it's not just an u, it's actually a hu at the end. So this is actually a pronoun suffix. It's going to be a 3ms suffix at the end. We have the verb avar in the middle. We can see that, which means to cross over, which would give us some idea when we're dealing with the boundaries of a sea. And then we have this nun right here, which doesn't really belong there, but it's what we call a nun, an energic nun, energicum, we call it in Latin, and it just gives a little more emphasis to it. You find it frequently in pausal forms, and this is where the athnach is actually at this part of the phrase as well. So it's not unusual to find this energetic nun here that allows you to accentuate this a little bit more. And this is a cow. It's an imperfect. PF, just a yod at the beginning. We don't have an affirmative, so zero affirmative, because that's a suffix. So it's a 3ms here, and a cow from avar means to cross over. So it's the sea. The subject of it is the sea, a boundary for the sea, and it does not cross over it. So the sea does not cross over the boundary, or the sea does not cross over the sand, so to speak, because the Lord has fixed that boundary to show his power. And then we find this verb here. Oh boy, this is another tough one here. It's going to be obviously an imperfect, but a consecutive. We can see this vav consecutive here, and it looks like we have a whole prefix here, a yit prefix. So it's going to be a hithpael, an HTP, if we want to call it that. And I got an U ending, so it's going to be a 3MP. And by the looks of it, from the verb ga'ash, not a very common verb, but a verb that means to toss to and fro, to go back and forth, with the hithpael having this reciprocal sort of understanding, something that's going back and forth. You can see we're talking about the waters, obviously here, going back and forth. Waltke, in his book on Hebrew syntax, actually thinks this may be related to an Akkadian stem. This hithpael here may be related to an Akkadian stem, meaning to do something continuously. And that might be the nuance as well. It's something that's happening over and over with the waters coming up to the sand of the seashore. And not, well, what do we have here? Oh, this is our unusual verb yakol, a little bit unusual. It's usually like this. This is a yod at the beginning, u at the end. So this is going to be an imperfect, a 3MP. It's a cow, although it's a little unusual with this shurek here, but it's regularly unusual for this verb, meaning to be able or to prevail. So it's they will go to and fro, they will not prevail, and they will roar. Here we have a perfect consecutive. This is a 3MP, our third common plural here, with just an U ending of it, but it's a perfect consecutive from the verb hama, like this. And if I have that right, hama, and that means to roar, like the ocean waves that would roar, means to make a lot of noise, but in this context here, obviously meaning to roar. And the subject of it is galav, literally his waves. This is the plural of gal, which means a wave or a billow. Anytime you have the gimel lamet combination, you're usually dealing with something round, like Gilead or other words like that. So this is something round. These are the waves. So his waves. So the waves is actually the subject of this verb. his waves will roar, but it actually is also the subject of these other two verbs, because we didn't have a specified subject yet with this 3MP over here or a 3MP here. So it's, they will toss back and forth. They will not prevail. They will roar, the waves. The waves will roar, and, well, this almost looks exactly what we had up here. Over here was the ocean, or the sea, which cannot cross over it. And we have exactly the same thing here, almost. You got that suffix at the end, but instead of an imperfect 3ms cow with an energic nun, we have that energic nun again here, because this is the end of the phrase. We have a shurek here. See that difference here? Up here it was just a segol, because this was a 3ms. This is a 3ms here. This is a 3mp, because it's referring to the waves are not able to cross over any of the boundaries that the Lord has made. So the sea can't cross over the boundary, the waves can't cross over the boundary either. All of this to show that the Lord is the one who is in control over the oceans, and stop and think about who this God is, and you should have a response of a godly fear and a godly trembling, especially when you're involved with such sin as the people are with their idolatry, which we will see. Well, let's go ahead and hide our work here. We're actually going to squeeze our text down. Just look briefly at a couple translations. First of all, in the NIV, there's not a lot of variation in most of the translations. So, should you not fear me, literally it's will you not fear me, but it probably has this sort of a moral obligation idea. Should you not fear me? So that's a good translation. Some will have will or shall you not, but should, it also works well, this conditional idea as well. Should you not fear me, declares the Lord. Should you not tremble in my presence, before me to tremble in my presence. I made the sand a boundary for the sea. I made the sand a boundary for the sea, an everlasting barrier it cannot cross. Okay, so we're good with that. Gavul layam, a statute for eternity, and it cannot cross. The waves may roll, so that idea of going back and forth over here, but they cannot prevail. They may roar, but they cannot cross it. So pretty straightforward. And as I said, there's not a whole lot of variation in most of the major translations. I like the New English Bible, coming from Britain. They did something just a little interesting here. Have you no fear of me, says the Lord. Okay, that's good. Will you not shiver before me? So they put this shiver where it usually means to tremble, but you can see why they did it, because they're picking up on this wordplay. Look at this now. Will you not shiver before me? Before me, who? So they're kind of developing this asher, this funny relative pronoun here, into a before me, who? Putting more emphasis on there. Who made the shivering sand? Well, it's just the word sand, but by putting the shivering sand, because the the light glimmering off the sand in sort of a shimmering way, maybe under the heat. So they're picking up this wordplay in Hebrew, which I thought that's a nice touch. I like that. It really kind of brings it out. Who made the shivering sand to bound the sea as a barrier, as a border, a barrier it can never pass. Its waves heave and toss, but they are powerless. They cannot prevail. Roar as they may, they cannot pass. This is the God with whom we have to do, with whom God's people had to do. And they need to stop and think about whom they were dealing with here. Well, God's going to continue his address to his people in the following verses. So check back with us soon for our next weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Hebrew. Shalom.